I started coming to terms and coming to a sense of reality with my past, with my history. I had to do a lot of forgiving other people, but I had to do a lot of forgiving myself too. And once I was able to show that to myself, that kindness to myself, I really was humbled. I was really humbled. You know, facing the music, you know, you don't want to, it's like, there's times when you're like being so stubborn, or when I was being so stubborn that I didn't want to face the reality of like how I had messed up in certain ways, like cleaning my side of the street, taking ownership for my part, realizing that you can only do so much. You can't force people to forgive you. You can't force people to take responsibility for the things that they did. You can only choose to forgive. And I think that forgiveness it benefits the forgiver more than the recipient of the forgiveness.
Correct. Welcome to Game Changers live from Miami, Florida. My name is Sergio Tigera. I'm your host. And each and every week, we bring you someone who has been a game changer in their field and who's touched the lives of thousands to get their perspective on their journey, their mindset, their struggles and successes, so that we can inspire you on your journey. So let's get started right now.
And welcome to Game Changers Live, everybody. My name is Sergio, and it's so good to have you here. Each and every week, we interview leaders and inspirational people from around the country who have been game changers in their field, talk about all different types of subjects to inspire and motivate you on your journey. And my guest today is none other than Nikki Spoelstra, here coming to you from Miami, Florida. Hey, Nikki.
Hey. Sergio, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know Nikki, she's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a mother of 2 boys, a wife, a dog mom, and a former Teacher of the Year. She established the In the Know with Nikki Spo podcast in 2021 to really highlight the stories of tenacious women. She's passionate about the arts. She has a huge background there in that sense, giving back to the community and physical and emotional and spiritual wellness. And she lives here in Coral Gables, Florida. Now, Nikki, you know, part of this whole podcast movement that you have going on right now, and we're talking about wellness, spiritual wellness. That's such an important topic right now because of the pandemic and mental health issues and great resignation. I think people are kind of coming to their senses and kind of snapping out of the rut that we've been in for so long, and really realizing what's important in life. And so tell me a bit about your background and how you started down this path, and why you think it's the right path for you, and why it's important now these days.
So I feel like I've been on a journey of healing since I can remember. I encountered a few, some traumatic events like growing up. And I think, after I talked to a therapist and things like that, I've learned a lot about trauma and how it impacts young people. And there's big T trauma and little t trauma. And I think that it's not appropriate to compare what type of trauma is more severe, because in everybody's unique position, like that's the best and worst case scenario in their world as they experience it. So for my set of experiences, I felt like I was healing just from the beginning of my life. There were certain things that happened to me and in my family that were difficult. And, growing up as an adolescent and then like really starting to become my own person, I had to face a lot of those things. And I experienced depression and anxiety as a teenager, and that was really difficult. And then, there's so many things that young women, young ladies, especially in the time that I grew up, and I think things are a lot more open now and healed now, not completely. I don't know that we ever will. I don't think that's a journey that we actually stop. I think it's forever. But in the time that I grew up, like we still lived in a world that dictated what women and girls should be and should do. And I didn't like that because I didn't like told what to do, first of all. And second of all, like I had a lot of pushback against like gender roles and so on. But as I grew, I started to, as a late teenager and a young adult, I really started to understand and realize that certain things that I had experienced really were not right with my soul, right? And so I think that, you know, and it comes full circle, Sergio, because my podcast, The Know, is really about the inner knowing, right? And you can take any experience in your life and you could present it to other people, but they can have a say, they can judge what it is, and they can say, oh no, that's not a big deal, or that is a big deal, or oh my gosh, you know, it's really not about anybody else's judgment. It's about what you know in your heart to be true and real. So I came to that understanding, and it was kind of like, it was a slow burn, right? Like I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't really know how to cope with it. I wasn't given the tools by my parents or those around me to really process some of the difficult aspects of life, and in my life in particular. So I started to like mask that with all types of things. Like I was a professional dancer for the Miami Heat, and a big part of my masking my own pain was a performance element. That's a big part of my journey, because if I was on stage and I was performing, I could affect you emotionally, right? And make you feel certain things that I'm evoking through movement, but you couldn't like affect me, right? I
Right.
was in the driver's seat in a way. That was like a form of me, like taking back control of my life. And I think a lot of us do that in so many different ways. Some of us become overachievers. We go to school and we're going to be in control of what we're doing and what we're earning. And all of these things we try to have a sense of control over. And, you know, fast forward, as I became a mom, I really experienced my own fair share of postpartum anxiety, which, you know, as I mentioned before, like that was already present in my life. Like I had already
Yeah.
experienced anxiety and depression, but then becoming a mom and having this entire life shift, like really knocked me off my
So
channel.
one of the things you talked about, so that I think it's really, really important right now is, for example, the self-image that young girls have of themselves, especially because of social media impacting that. And it's been, you know, the Facebook papers have come out and they're talking about how social media negatively impacts the self-image and self-esteem of young girls, because you're always comparing, right? You're always kind of looking at the best, you know, feed the best pictures that these people take, and you think it's the reality. And that's really shaping their minds and their confidence about themselves and so forth. And that's adding, you know, a huge piece of complexity to the mental health issues that we're facing today. And I have an 8-year-old girl, and I'm just kind of, you know, scared to death in the sense of when she starts going into social media and so forth, because I can see some of those kind of long-term effects. When you talk about knowing yourself, right, that's really important, because it's about you and feeling right about your experiences and kind of healing inside. And you talk about performing, right? It's kind of like putting on a mask, like everything's okay. And you can't judge a book by its cover. You know, we talked about that, you know, when we had some coffee earlier, and that is so critical, because from the outside, things seem great, right? I mean, you know, people look at you, you know, your husband is the coach of the Miami Heat. It seems like you have a great life. You got your podcast, your businesses, but people don't see what's beneath the surface. You know, we all have our experiences, our traumas that we got to kind of learn to try to cope with and or cure, right? And so, number one, having empathy for people, even though it seems like everything's perfect in their life, everyone has their issues, right? They're their cross to bear.
So it wasn't until I really got right with myself that I was able to have real empathy for other people. I think I always had a chip on my shoulder because I was really angry. And I had valid reasons to be angry at some of
Mhm.
that happened to me, but I was like beginning to fall into a space of like just being angry at the world and thinking that the world was unfair. And I don't think that when I share these parts of my story, Sergio, I don't share it to be like, look, woe is me. I share it because these feelings are familiar feelings, I think, to many people, regardless of what you might have gone through in your life. And it could be the most random stuff that just really, really left an impact on you. It wasn't until I really started to heal my own shit that I started to actually have a sense of real empathy for others, because I started coming to terms and coming to a sense of reality with my past, with my history. I had to do a lot of forgiving other people, but I had to do a lot of forgiving myself too. And once I was able to show that to myself, that kindness to myself, I really was humbled. I was really humbled, you know, facing the music. You know, you don't want to, it's like there's times when you're like being so stubborn, or when I was being so stubborn that I didn't want to face the reality of like how I had messed up in certain ways, like cleaning my side of the street, taking ownership from my part, realizing that you can only do so much. You can't force people to forgive you. You can't force people to take responsibility for the things that they did. You can only choose to forgive. And I think that forgiveness it benefits the forgiver more than the recipient of the forgiveness.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? I forgive you. That benefits me more. That helps my soul more. And it took a long time. And it specifically happened, like there was a huge shift, specifically when I chose to live a life of sobriety, when I started pursuing my sobriety. But to your point, like social media, you know, my generation of girls and people didn't grow up having the social media. So on some level, we figured out how to do life without it. And a lot of us came into social media, especially like the rise of Instagram, in our early adulthood. You know, so we had already done a whole bunch of things, you know, where a lot of them, maybe like the mistakes we were making in our youth wasn't like broadcasted to the world.
Thankfully so.
Right?
Go back to the college days.
But still, it exists. So I've shared this before on my podcast, but like when Eric and I even came out as a couple, like people would write stuff about my mistakes of the past that, you know, made me feel really ashamed, things that I had deeply regretted. And so on some level, like that really impacted me, you know, because all of my stuff kind of was like out there for people to judge and comment on and have an opinion on. And that was really, really hard for me to go through. And it took a lot of work on myself to be like, okay, I accept, you know, the failures, the mistakes, the things I've done in my life that don't make me proud, and the things that I want to do better. And I am choosing now to walk a path of being better every day. And like the social media part of that is, you don't know. Nobody knew that I was struggling with alcohol. Nobody knew. Like nobody would say it. No one. If you looked at like my social media, if you see me at games, or if you see me at an appearance with my husband, like it looks like the life, you know. And that's not to say that it's not the life. I have a beautiful, beautiful life. And the thing is like now I realize how beautiful my life is. Because before, when I was living to impress other people, or living with this mask, right, that we talked about, mentioned,
performance mask, yeah.
It was a mask. It was a performance. It didn't even allow me. It like was a block preventing me from actually seeing the real value and the real beauty that my life has to offer, or just has as a whole, you know, flaws and all.
It takes courage to make yourself vulnerable and kind of expose your weaknesses, right? Or your past, because of the ego. Or obviously we don't want to be criticized. We don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to be seen as, you know, as having made those mistakes. But there is tremendous strength in coming out and owning that, to then say, okay, yeah, that happened, but look what I'm doing now. And so, you know, just like everybody, you know, like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the teeth, right? Everyone's going to get knocked down. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to make mistakes. And a lot of them you may not be proud about, but it's how you get back up that's very inspirational to others. And others find empathy for you in that, right? Because they can relate. If everything is perfect, people can't relate to you, because you're like, oh, she has no problems, or, you know, he has no problems, whatever it is. But it's not easy to come out and say, hey, I did this, I screwed up big time, and you know, I hurt some people, or whatever it is, or, you know, I went through this embarrassing situation. It's, you know, how do you kind of, how did you come to terms with that? You know, was that just, it just came out and you said, okay, yep, you know, here I am, or did you put that out?
Well, you mentioned a couple of things that I actually want to touch on. Is like, I don't think that you have to have made a bunch of mistakes or have had this like tremendous trauma or whatever to speak your truth, make your voice heard, and to have an impact. Like, you can have clout without having like necessarily suffered like the worst
Sure.
experiences. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes our society gets caught up in that, like, oh, well, you know, she doesn't have any problems. Like, you can have a beautiful life and still have a like
Sure.
value in your voice. So that's one thing. I also think that the second thing I wanted to touch on is when you're talking about like sharing your truth and speaking up about your like being vulnerable. I think the generation before us was like the complete opposite, right? Like parents
Right.
before, grandparents were like, you don't say anything about your life. This
Never
is our
show the weakness.
so many like family secrets that you put on your best face to the world. You put on the performance. Like nobody should know what's going on within our family unit. You don't give them that sign that you're weak, like you said, because it can be perceived as weakness. And now I think the world is awakening to the idea that like vulnerability is strength.
Correct.
Like I am secure enough in myself to show my vulnerabilities. And I think there's a fine line, because when you ask me like, how did it come to be that way? A big part of it was like, it was part of my own healing journey. Like I needed to be real. Like I felt like I was wearing the mask and that was poisoning me. It was really poisoning me. So I was like, you know what? Screw it. Like I need to be able to talk about who I am, some of the things that I've been through. And I really strongly believe that there's power in community. And ever since I started speaking up about some of the experiences I've had and just being vulnerable enough, like sharing my knowledge of like the healing benefits of vulnerability, people have been reaching out to me more than ever, saying like, I related to that. I've been through that. No, but I've never been able to. I've had people tell me things in the grocery store. I'm talking about like I'm in the line at Whole Foods, like going down the aisles with my shopping cart. And people are like, oh my gosh, I listened to that. And I've never told anybody that this happened to me. And I'm a stranger. Like,
right. They connected with you over the podcast. I mean, they connected with your message, right?
Either the podcast or, you know, I started opening up on my Instagram platform and writing like blog type of posts where people were like, oh my gosh, you know, and sending me DMs, things like that. And then I got to really just feel like, okay, my life and my experiences are very valuable, you know, and we're not alone in these things. Because I think like the problem of secret keeping is like you start to feel isolated when you keep secrets.
What do you think is the biggest or most common problem that you find female leaders, right, as they come into their own and they're finding their voice and so forth? What do you think is the biggest roadblock that they have right now from your experience?
Okay, I'm going to say something a little bit out there, but I think that women that are stepping into their power and really like passionate about what they are saying are experiencing fewer and fewer roadblocks. I think that women collectively are turning towards each other instead of away from each other. I would say previously, and I think it's still a problem, so it is a bit of a problem still, but things are changing, that women are pitted against each other since the beginning of time. I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks. Truthfully, it's like you have to be the top woman. Like there's plenty of men in the world that are like, I'm a successful man and I'm a successful man too, you know? Like
right. There wasn't the kind of catty feature about it.
Exactly. Women historically have to be like the number one woman in the room. And I'm like, dude, there's enough success and wealth and power and beauty to go around for all of us. Like all of us, if I share my light with you, you shine too. Like that's how I see it. And so I think the biggest problem is in women stepping into their power is other women trying to pull them down and overstep them. And I think it's just a different experience for men. I really do.
That's interesting. That's a great point, because you're talking about who you hang out with, right? Who you surround yourself with. And that's like the age old kind of saying, right? Tell me the 5 people you surround yourself with and I'll tell you who you are. That is so important, especially like we grow up, we develop friends. Some are fantastic. Others are okay. You know, perhaps they're not elevating and pushing us and pushing each other to the limit. Have you ever gone through a period where you've kind of taken inventory of your friends and kind of like who you surround yourself with and started becoming very selective and saying, okay, these are the people that I can elevate and they elevate me, there's that mutual kind of benefit. And there's others that maybe hold a different place, in my life.
I think we're doing that constantly. Like, I think our lives are constantly evolving. And, as you grow, I'm so lucky to live in my hometown, given my husband's profession. Like, most coaches are bouncing around their entire careers. We're so fortunate that Eric has had the opportunity to stay here in Miami, which happens to also be my hometown. That gives me a tremendous amount of access and resources to people that like really, really know me before my life with him. Right. Even though I feel like I've spent so much of my life with him. We met when I was 19 years old. So, but I have my friends from childhood, like friends that I still have close friends from like when I was 5 years old, and for a long time, I kept my circle so small. I was like, those are my only friends. My only friends were like the ones that I made in grade school. And they're the ones who knew my story and knew some of the things that I had gone through, and nobody else could have been trustworthy. And, as life has it, we all grow up. And so we go in different directions. And while I may not be super close with some of those people anymore, I think that they hold tremendous value in my life because your friendships and your circles, they may shift, right? So I may find these other people that are the level up for me. Like I want to surround myself with people that like require me to level up, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something really so beautiful about your old friendships that have like been part of your journey from day one, even if they're not like pushing you on the level up all the time.
Sure.
Being there and knowing
some comfort in that
as a human being, without all the extra fluff, which, it happens to me a lot. And I will say that I'm also super fortunate because I think that Eric is like one of the smartest people I've ever met ever. And he's like my
pretty sharp.
Like I'm serious. Like this guy is so hardworking and he would never say this about himself. If you've ever heard an interview with him, like he does not ever toot his own horn. Like it's totally not his thing.
Right.
But like he's one of the smartest people I know. And so being around him every single day and just seeing everything that he accomplishes and works so hard for and his integrity, like that, he's like the number one, like level up for me in my life. And I get to be around him, all the time. But I have my friendship circles have changed over time. And I really now, especially Sergio, try to see the value in every type of friendship. Obviously, there's going to be people who like screw you over and those are not your friends, or like people who aren't happy for you when you reach success. Those aren't your friends either.
Okay. So you mentioned that obviously your husband travels quite a bit. There's other women out there and other, men whose their spouse travels a lot. And that sometimes could be good to get some space. Other times it could be difficult because your husband travels a lot over holidays, which make it really tough, with your kids. And how do you handle that? Like that's got to be difficult.
So it was a lot easier, obviously, before we had children, right? Because like I could still do my thing.
Everything was easier before kids.
But like everything, like I could still very much have like my own life and I could see my friends and I had things to do. I could go out and whatever, like keep myself entertained. Now with kids, it is a lot harder and it takes a tremendous amount of intentionality and communication. There's things that happen all the time, like with the kids that he's just not around for. And I have to like make those game time decisions on behalf of our family of like what the call is, and that's really difficult. It's also like I'm an adult and I understand him leaving the home, right? Like I might miss him, but I know we're talking. Little kids especially have a very limited understanding of time, right?
Sure.
So November was really difficult because the team was on the road. The Miami Heat was on the road for a lot of November. I think there were something like 4 home games. They were gone for 9 days and then home for 3 and then gone for like another 9.
Wow.
You're thinking about that and it's hard. Like the transitions are really hard for the kids. They're like, where's daddy? I mean, like little things like one of my sons went into his office and started crying, daddy, 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 daddy. And it breaks my heart, So we have things. We FaceTime all the time. I've converted Eric into a FaceTimer. We never used to FaceTime before, but now with kids, we FaceTime all the time. And thank goodness for that type of technology, but it is really difficult. And, every time I talk about it, Sergio, it's so weird. Like I have this sense of like, I shouldn't talk about that because I should just be grateful, right? Like I should just be grateful for this beautiful life we have. And we have a very comfortable life. But I don't care how much money you have or how many comforts in life you have. Loneliness is loneliness, and loneliness is
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like, he's my
Yeah.
person and he's not here, and that's hard, you know?
Yeah.
I remember posting about Thanksgiving. Like, I was so sad on Thanksgiving. I was so sad. And I knew I was going to see him soon. But I was like, oh my gosh, my kids are sick. My family can't come over. And I felt so down. And I remember people being like, well, don't worry, at least you get to do this and at least you get to do that. And that's true. But I think something that's also happening, and I really, for your listeners that are tuning in, like, you may not think you do this and maybe you don't, but I really want people to think about the concept of toxic positivity, that like we have to brush off the difficult things. Like, two things can be true. You can have immense gratitude and also feel like this
And
sucks right
still
now.
feel lonely,
Right.
because
Like,
what's going on right there.
Totally. Like, this experience is hard. Like, good vibes only. No, I'm just over the good vibes only. I think that there's a lot more truth and power in the concept of, a person I interviewed, Megan B. Murphy, always says good vibes mostly. I'm like, let's have good vibes most of the time.
Mhm.
I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. I'm going to struggle with XYZ things in my life, just like any other person.
And that's a really interesting point. I like that, because we tend to always just brush off and kind of ignore or just put a Band-Aid over our pain. And if we don't recognize our pain, it just kind of festers in there. It doesn't go away. It just kind of, it lingers, so to speak, right?
Okay.
Maybe to a lesser degree, but it's just always there in the background. And if you can't give yourself the space and the time to just step into it and work through it, when people pass away, crying is therapeutic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like sometimes you just need to feel it and go through it, and so that you can kind of release it. Just kind of patching it over with positivity all the time isn't necessarily the best thing for you.
Well, and like I said, like before, keeping secrets is poisonous, right? And so, and I'm going to like bring this like really full circle. I kept secrets about the abuse that I encountered as a child, right? For a long, long, long time, many years. And keeping that secret was like poisonous to my soul. My kids, like, we don't even use the word secret in our home, because like nobody should be asking you to keep a secret. There's a different, we can do a surprise. Like, we're going to surprise daddy with a birthday balloon thing.
Sure, yeah.
We're going to surprise someone. But if like, nobody should ever be asking you to keep a secret, like from an adult, right? So that's like where this whole thing, maybe it's an obsession with like anti-secret keeping or whatever, but we don't just keep secrets for other people. We keep secrets from ourselves, right? And that's part of the patching it up effect, right? That we don't want to face it. So we keep it as a separate part of us. It doesn't mean that it's like gone, like you said. It's there doing push-ups, getting stronger and building itself up, building both until like you really can't take it. So I do think it's super important to like process the things.
Who are the people that inspire you? Who are your role models kind of growing up or even now that you really look up to as people that you aspire to be like?
It's so crazy when people ask me about mentorship. I have been open about the fact that I have a strained relationship with my mom, and I always kind of joke, and it's not so much a joke, but like I raised myself in a lot of ways. I raised myself. And so I didn't really understand the concept of mentors. But if I had to really like go into it, one of the most important female figures in my life was my grandmother. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to see things beautifully. My aunts, they taught me how to paint. They showed me what creative beauty was about. And the power and the beauty of my mind and how I could create things. That was, instrumental in my development as a young person. And then I had teachers along the way. My high school English teacher was really, really inspiring to me. She was so free and so creative. And she was just like, she believed in me. It changes in adulthood. I think my friend group is really, really inspiring. I'm so lucky to have people in my lives. I'm like tempted to name everybody, and then I'm like, wait, I'm going to forget and I don't want to leave anybody out. I think like if any of my friends are listening, they know who they are, who inspire me.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people, the guests on my podcasts inspire me. Like, that's why I reach out to them and ask them to speak, because I'm inspired by them and I'm motivated, I'm like I mentioned, I want to be on a constant level up, even if that means I slow down from time to time, because I don't, just like toxic positivity, it doesn't need to be up, up, up all the time. Like, it can be out, it can be pause, it can be moved side to side. Maybe sometimes we're taking a step back so that we can really propel forward. Like, the movement is what it's about for me. I need to be moving.
And talking about art and the influence that your family had on you from that point of view and your teachers, you became quite the art salesperson, right? Because you had quite a career in that space, and you got Art Basel going on right now.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so I studied art history in college, and oh my gosh, at college I was like trying to survive. I like worked 4 jobs. I'll tell you what the jobs were.
Wow.
Dancing. I was a dancer. I taught at a dance studio called Just Dance It, and I taught, I don't know, like 14 classes a week, so 14 hours. I worked at Diane von Furstenberg in like high-end clothing sales at Merrick Park, and I danced at Cameo nightclub.
That's right. All of us who grew up in Miami remember Cameo well.
Totally. So that was me. I did that, and I supported myself completely, 100%, like all throughout my early adulthood, like no help. Like, I did that, and at the time I was super upset about it. I was like, nobody's taking care of me. I'm abandoned. I was so angry about it. But like, in hindsight, I'm like, I did that. I'm like,
something to be proud of.
I took care of myself, and I saved money. I paid my tuition. I paid my car off, but I hustled hard, and it was a very, very difficult, like strenuous, like time of my life. It was hard. So I studied art history, but I'm like, I just like art history. Like, what am I going to do with art history? Then I realized, okay, I can either work in an art gallery, or I can like try to get a master's, which I don't have money for, and I don't want to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt for, and I can work in a museum, being like a curator. I'd also have to learn 3 languages, and I'm like, I like, at the time I'm like, I'm not smart enough to learn 3 languages, which I totally like don't even believe have that thought anymore. Like, I've evolved past that. But I moved out to LA, and I was going to do the dance thing, like try to book jobs where I could out in Los Angeles, be a dancer. And I wasn't getting any jobs booked. And so I started knocking on every gallery's door, and I was so annoying. I'd like go there with my resume. I would like show up the next day with my resume again. I would like show up 3 days later. Like, did you look over my resume?
Yeah.
Like, this one gallery owner was like, okay, you're really persistent. I'm going to give you a shot. So I took that job, and I was like just like an entry-level sales associate selling like really expensive artworks, like way over my head. So I started to like make decent money after all these years of working really hard. And like, there would be times where I was like, how am I going to pay for groceries? Like, how am I going to pay for groceries this week? So like, having my own apartment and being able to have fun, like fly home to Miami to see my family and save money and kind of like replenish, all of the money I'd spent investing in myself to like go out and build a dream. But what's wild about that is like, after a while, I started to feel really empty. Kind of felt like a car salesperson, and I'm not knocking car salespeople, but I'm like, I felt like I was just like on the rotation, like trying to cut a sale, like trying to get, and I'm like, that's not my personality. Like, I value relationships, and I have a genuine appreciation for art. So I left the art gallery, and I became a middle school teacher. So becoming a middle school teacher was awesome because it kind of hit on all of these things that I was passionate about. I was an English teacher, which, as I mentioned, my English teacher was super inspiring to me. Love creative writing, and I love literature and fiction. So I got to teach 7th grade language arts in an inner city middle school, and I got to coach the dance team, and I had an art and design club. So all of it,
kind of hitting on all the points that you're passionate about.
Totally. And, my relationship with Eric was moving into a space where like we started living together. We were starting to build a life together, and a teacher schedule like made me flexible, made it my life flexible enough where I could do things with him, like our summer vacation aligned with the basketball season. And so we could travel together. Like those were really big relationship building things for us, given how much he traveled during the season. Right. So that worked out for a while.
And at the time he wasn't coach yet, right?
He was. At that time
he was already.
He was coach already.
So been coach forever. How many years has he been coach?
Thank you to our program, because they've believed in Eric for a long time, and we're stuck with him during the highs and the lows, of the season when other places don't really do that, and the Miami Heat is really, really special in that way, and we're so grateful as a family. What was I saying?
So at the time you were teaching and you were moving in together and so forth, and then from there.
Okay. So we started living together. I did the teaching thing for about 5 years. I actually won, I think it was 5 years.
You won the teacher of the year?
Earned teacher of the year. That was voted on the administration and the other, my colleagues, my fellow teachers. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge honor. And then I had babies and I took some time off. And then I realized I am not good at taking time off, and it comes full circle. I need to be moving in a direction, like even if it's right. I need to be moving. And I went back to doing art, and it's so crazy because my relationship with selling art completely changed.
The approach changed from just
my approach changed.
Kind of pitching art to the relationships of art.
Yeah. And it's before, when I was younger, like in my early 20s, coming out of college and having no money, it was all about I gotta make the money to buy the groceries because I was so scared. I didn't ever want to feel like that again. Mm-hmm.
The lack. Yeah.
The lack. So it was always coming now, when I returned to art after I had kids, I was like, my life is abundant. I will always be okay. And because I was approaching it from a less stressful space, I excelled far more than I ever did before.
Yeah. Sometimes when we're trying to push too hard, it doesn't come, right. Kind of things need to kind of be attracted to you, and you got to kind of do it naturally. You've been doing some amazing stuff and the future, right? So you got your podcast, you're doing some amazing things. You've got some great partnerships and collaborations in the Instagram space with Brightline and now Lifetime. And what's the future for you? What does the next 5-10 years look like for you and your brand?
I have a business coach who walked me through this, and it was so tough because I was like, I don't know. And she's like, we got to figure that out, mama. So I was like, I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants right now. But ultimately, I want to have a great impact on people, on women particularly. So I see myself down the road hosting live events, hosting retreats, doing, hopefully public speaking opportunities will come up. I really want to work with women and help them see the light and reflect the light. And I'm really still sorting out what that's going to look like specifically for me, but I love hosting podcasts. I love interviewing. Mm-hmm. I have to say, I was approaching this podcast, I'm like, oh, wow, it feels so much easier to be a guest than the host. I don't really have to prepare. I just have to answer your questions. Right? I know that I take a lot of prep time into account for when I'm getting ready to host someone.
Right.
But I really love doing it. And I love sharing wisdom with people that they might not have thought to seek out necessarily. Right.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about the podcasting is that there are so many interesting people out there with so many amazing stories, and you just had no idea about them. And it just opens your eyes to those possibilities and those relationships and their world. And it's fascinating to talk to interesting people who have a different perspective and are driven and are passionate about what they do. Well, Nikki, hey, congratulations on all your success and your journey. There's a lot of great content in here that I'm sure is going to inspire and motivate a lot of women and men as well that are, going through their own struggles, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. You got to be persistent and consistent and passionate in your pursuit. And you've definitely done that over the years. So congrats.
Thank you so much, Sergio.
If you loved what you heard in today's episode of Game Changers, please subscribe and rate us. The lessons and the stories in these podcasts are immensely valuable, so I invite you to share them with a friend who needs to hear it. You may end up being the game changer in their lives.